two pieces of cardboard. First one is the one I actually want to be working on. The second is my sacrificial. I'm trying to encourage everybody to use the sacrificial layer whenever you're using cutting data. Whenever you're cutting your workpiece, you're of course going all the way through. That means you're delivering surplus heat either to the vector grid itself, which gradually wears it down, or maybe to some affordable sacrificials we don't have to worry about. Please protect the equipment. Alright, so I'm going to install the workpiece itself and the sacrificial. To set my focus, I'm going to pop the focus gauge onto these two pegs here, and then hit the focus button to go into focus mode. Once I'm in focus mode, these up and down arrows are engaged, and I'm just going to raise up the work bed, the optics head stays stationary, until the tip of the focus gauge is just coming into contact with my workpiece. You've got two cues here at the right spot. Visually, you will start to see this focus gauge move forward and up. But you want to catch the very, very first movement, and that can be a very subtle cue, particularly late at night. So I tend to recommend the tactile method. Cheap feeler gauge, just wiggle a piece of paper until you feel resistance, then you're at the right spot. You can hold the up button down until you're close, but you will want individual button presses at the end to really dial that in. So I can still move the paper, but I'm feeling a little resistance. That's perfect. Next, pop off the focus gauge. You don't want to be going back to the corner and run this into the ruler. And finally, exit focus mode, using the completely non-intuitive reset button. That causes more confusion than any button on the laser. All that reset does is it re-engages the motors and goes back to the home position.
What is, if you hit focus again, what indicator does it give you?
You hit focus, you go into focus mode, and it pops
right?
out.
No, I mean, if you're in focus mode, you hit focus mode again, because people are gonna...
It does nothing.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
It just stays in focus.
Yep.
Gotcha. All right.
The reset takes it back up. So, any questions on focus? All right. That is our default focus height. We brought the center part of that hourglass shape into alignment with the top surface of our workpiece, which is going to work very well for most etching data and also for cutting through thin workpieces.
Actually, you said there were two cues, right? One is to be able to slide that paper just barely. What was the second one?
Down here. You'll actually see the focus gauge start to move up a little bit.
Okay.
So I'm going to do that here. Watch very carefully. You can see it starting to move out. But that's pretty hard to see. And that was actually 4 button presses too high earlier. It was a pretty small movement. So I came back down to where it was. Let's go back up. Now, depending on what you're working with, just looking at it may actually work better. For example, if you're working with cloth that may be bubbling up slightly and you want to be just a little bit too high so it doesn't brush against anything, you just watch for the cloth to deform a little bit.
So what's the size of the middle of the hourglass? Because you've got some inconsistency in your material there.
Yes. You will see different effects for being out of focus on different materials. When you're working on most of the combustible organics like wood and cloth, you can only be maybe a 1/16th to an 1/8 of an inch out of focus before you start seeing a really big difference in the effect. For something like glass, you can be almost an inch out of focus and you'll still be getting almost exactly the same results as being perfectly in focus. So big range, depends on the materials. Everything about the laser is dependent on the material.
Can the table track? So can it change height during the cut?
No. They call it CNC. It's actually kind of like halfway to CNC.
Yeah.
It's going to drive on the X and Y axis. Z remains stationary. You just said it at the beginning.
This is good for flat glass.
Yeah. Yeah, anything that has too much of a height range, you're going to need to break your job into different portions, reposition your workpiece. You can definitely do it, but it may take a lot of time and creativity. And depending on what you're doing, may or may not be worth the hassle. The other option is the rotary attachment, where you just position your workpiece in a couple of wheels and it rotates it for you. But that only works on things that are very, very round, so you may need to mount other objects in a jig. But you could do something like mount your shoe in a jig and spin it on the rotary. Why not? Okay, I totally got sidetracked. Focus! Default focus height is what we've just done, which has the tightest focus, which is a spot size of 3 to 5 thousandths of an inch, on the surface of the material. The only time you might need to do something different is when you're cutting through thicker materials, because now we have that bottom half of the hourglass shape engulfed in the workpiece itself, which means you may see sloped sides to the cut. It's not going to be a big slope, depending on what you're doing, it may not matter, but if you're trying to do, say, press fit acrylic boxes and you need really straight sides, you will need to do something other than the default focus. You'll want to set your focus somewhere in the middle. So the easiest way to get your initial adjustment for that is just bring in something that's half the height. If you're cutting through 1/4 inch acrylic and you need straight sides, bring Use the focus gauge to focus to the top of the 1/8 inch acrylic. Then swap in your 1/4 inch workpiece. Your focus should be perfectly in the center and you should get nice straight walls to your cut. Any questions there?
So you can set the focus, drop your table to move the piece in without hitting the optics and put it back in focus.
What you do, well, like for this example, if I wanted to cut cleanly through 2 layers of cardboard, I focus to the top of 1 layer, leave everything where it is, and just slide in my second layer.
Okay.
So I haven't changed the table height, but now the focus is calibrated to halfway into my total workpiece.
Yeah, I was just concerned about hitting, like if you have a lot of thickness involved.
Yeah, there's a limit to it. Actually, the memo part lasers, you can't do quite as much. On these lasers, that's going to be a problem. With the autofocus apparatus installed, you can focus to the center of something that is maybe 5/8 thick, I think, about. I haven't taken a precise measurement, but somewhere around there. With the autofocus apparatus missing, you'll actually be able to focus to the center of a thicker workpiece, but if you screw up, there are going to be stronger repercussions. The autofocus apparatus, if you screw up a little bit and it brushes against your workpiece, it's actually flexible, so it's not a big problem. The next thing you're going to hit is going to be this air assist nozzle here, and that has no give whatsoever. That is going to be a hard crash, and it's going to cause a lot of damage to the machine. So just be aware of that. Okay, any other questions on focus? Let's talk home position. By default, your home position is up here in the top left corner, and that's going to work well in many, many cases. But I would take that with a grain of salt also. You see all this paint that's been etched off the rulers? That is from when people trusted the home position and somebody who had been working on it before screwed up the calibration, and the home position was actually set back over the rulers. So I'm going to teach you how to set a custom home position. Partially to correct a calibration error, if you need to, and partially just because there's a bunch of different reasons you may want to start out in the middle of the table. For example, if you're trying to use a particular portion of wood grain, maybe trying to match an existing design, or like I said, the side of your boot. Yeah, those are all great reasons to set a home position out on the table, and you'll have better control about exactly where your artwork's going to fall. So what we're going to do is disengage the motors on the gantry and the optics head on Y and X axes, manually push those to a new position, and then press set home to lock in that new position. Keystrokes are as follows. We're going to press XY off to disable the motors, but we get a prompt. XY off, question mark, go and stop. I want to emphasize this question mark. It is surprisingly important. If there's a question mark on screen, go and stop, map to yes and no. So this case is asking us, do we really want to disengage the motors? Yes, we do. We'll press go for yes. If there's no question mark on screen and you press the go button, 9 times out of 10, it's going to run whatever job is sitting in the queue. Caution. But enough of that, we'll come back to that later. We've done XY off, go for yes. Now we can use the 1-finger rule to move around the gantry and the optics head. 1 finger, because if you can move the gantry easily with 1 finger, you know the motors are actually disengaged and you're not stripping them out. I want to emphasize this as well because that is one of the biggest problems we have here with the lasers at Tech Shop. It's very easy to get it kind of lazy, get into the habit, you press X, Y off, don't look at the display, grab the gantry, and by the time you realize the motors are still locked in, the damage is already done because you haven't answered that question. So, 1 finger rule will prevent that. Actually, go ahead and feel the gantry now just to get a feel for it. It's not always going to be quite that loose. I think this laser's gotten some recent maintenance, but this is what you're hoping for. And I always start with the gantry just because you're less likely to do damage to it. The belt for the optics head, you can knock that out of alignment really easily if the motor's locked in. Alright, so you've got 2 cues for where you are on the workbed here. First is a coordinate set on the front, in inches by default, and down to the 100th of an inch. Great reference with one caveat. If somebody has already messed up the calibration, this is not going to be a literal measurement from the corner of the workbed. It's going from wherever the home position actually is. However, that comes in very handy later on because you can set a custom 0 position and use this to take measurements and get very good accuracy that way. Your second reference is this pointer, which can be turned on and off over here. And you can get surprisingly good results just by putting the red dot wherever you want the home position to be. Whenever you're there, go ahead and just lock that in by pressing set home. And this is the trap Encalade has laid for us. There is a display saying set home center, but there is no question mark, so no action is expected at this point. If you press the go button, whatever job is in the queue will start to run. Danger, danger, danger. Okay, By the way, if this display really bothers you, you can hit the reset button. That's pretty safe, but you don't have to. Any questions on setting a custom home position?
What is the cancel if you accidentally hit go?
Stop.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about...
No, I didn't understand this.